Good evening, and welcome back to Footnotes Folly. I am Professor Reginald St. John Pemberton, and we return to the great work of Flavius Josephus, the Antiquities of the Jews. Book 3 left the people camped at the border of the Promised Land, sentenced by their own fear to turn back into the desert. Tonight we open Book 4, and we give it complete, in plain modern English, from Whiston's grand old public domain translation. The plain rendering and the asides are my own. This is Book 4, Part 1, and it covers the hardest stretch of the whole journey, 38 years of wandering and dying in the wilderness. We begin with a reckless attack on Canaan launched against Moses' word, and beaten back. Then comes the most dangerous moment of Moses' life, the rebellion of Korah, a wealthy, eloquent kinsman who rouses the crowd against Moses and Aaron and demands the priesthood for the people. Watch how that quarrel ends with the ground itself opening underfoot, and a dead man's rod that blossoms overnight. And then the long, grey years, and 2 graves in the desert of Miriam, and Aaron on the mountain. Let us begin.
Life in the wilderness was so unpleasant and hard for the Hebrews that they became restless and unwilling to bear it any longer. Although God had forbidden them to attack the Canaanites, they could not be persuaded to obey Moses and remain quiet. They began to think they could defeat their enemies without his approval. They accused Moses and suspected that he was deliberately keeping them in misery, so that they would always need his help. So they resolved to make war on the Canaanites. They said that God helped them not because Moses interceded for them, but because he cared for the whole nation on account of their forefathers, whose affairs he had taken under his own direction. They also said that God had formerly obtained their freedom because of their own virtue, and that he would help them now as well, since they were willing to labor for it. They claimed that they had enough strength to conquer their enemies even if Moses wished to turn God away from them. They said it was better for them to be their own masters. They should not rejoice so much in being delivered from the insults they had suffered under the Egyptians, that they would now endure Moses' tyranny, let themselves be deceived, and live according to his pleasure. They spoke as if Moses pretended that God foretold their affairs only out of kindness to him, and as if they were not all the descendants of Abraham. They complained that Moses made himself the only source of all the knowledge they had, so that they must always learn it from him. They decided it would be wise to resist his arrogant claims, put their confidence in God, and take possession of the land God had promised them. They would not listen to Moses, who, on that account and under the pretense of divine authority, forbade them to do it. When they considered their present distress, and that in those desert places they could expect their condition to grow still worse, they determined to fight the Canaanites, submitting only to God as their supreme commander and not waiting for help from their legislator. After they had settled on this course as the best one for them, they marched against their enemies. But the Canaanites were not frightened either by the attack itself or by the great number of those who made it. Instead, they met them with great courage. Many of the Hebrews were killed, and when the rest of the army fell into disorder, they were pursued and fled shamefully back to their camp. This unexpected disaster threw them into complete despair. They no longer hoped for anything good, because they concluded from what had happened that the affliction had come from the wrath of God, since they had rashly gone out to war without his approval. When Moses saw how deeply they were affected by the defeat, he became afraid that the enemy, made arrogant by this victory and eager to gain still greater glory, would attack them again. He therefore decided that the proper course was to withdraw the army farther into the wilderness, away from the Canaanites. The multitude again gave themselves up to his guidance, for they understood that without his care their affairs could not prosper. So Moses made the host move on, and led them deeper into the wilderness, intending to let them rest there, and not allow them to fight the Canaanites until God should give them a more favorable opportunity. What often happens in great armies, especially after failure, now happened among the Jews. They became hard to please and difficult to govern. They numbered 600,000, and because of their great multitude, they were not easily subject to their rulers even in prosperous times. Now, because of the distress they were in and the calamities they were suffering, they were more angry than usual, both with one another and with their leader. A sedition overtook them unlike any example known among either the Greeks or the barbarians. It put them in danger of total destruction, yet they were saved by Moses, who did not remember against them that they had almost stoned him to death. Nor did God neglect to prevent their ruin. Although they had insulted their legislator and the laws, and had disobeyed the commandments God had sent them through Moses, he delivered them from those terrible disasters which, without his providential care, this sedition would have brought upon them. I will first explain the cause from which the sedition arose, then describe the sedition itself, and also the arrangements made for their government after it was over. Korah was a Hebrew of high standing, both because of his family and because of his wealth. He was also a capable speaker, and could easily persuade the people by his speeches. He saw that Moses held an exceedingly great dignity, and he envied him for it. Korah was of the same tribe as Moses, and was related to him, and he was especially grieved because he thought that he himself deserved that honorable position better, since he had great riches, and was not inferior to Moses in birth. So he stirred up an outcry against Moses among the Levites, who were of the same tribe, and among his own kindred. It is a very sad thing that you should overlook Moses while he hunts after glory and prepares the way to it for himself. By corrupt methods, and under the pretense of God's command, he has obtained it. Contrary to the laws, he has given the priesthood to Aaron, not by the common vote of the multitude, but by his own decision, handing out honors in this way to whomever he pleases. This hidden way of imposing on us is harder to bear than if open force had been used against us, because he is not only seizing our power without our consent, but doing it while we are unaware of his schemes against us. Anyone who knows that he deserves some dignity tries to gain it by persuasion, not by an arrogant use of violence. Those who believe it is impossible to obtain honors justly put on an appearance of goodness and do not bring in force, but by cunning tricks grow wickedly powerful. It is proper for the multitude to punish such men even while they think their designs are hidden, and not to let them grow strong until they become our open enemies. What account can Moses give for why he has bestowed the priesthood on Aaron and his sons? If God had determined to give that honor to one of the tribe of Levi, I am more worthy of it than Aaron is, since I am equal to Moses in family and superior to him both in wealth and in age. But if God had determined to give it to the eldest tribe, then the tribe of Reuben would have the fairest claim, and then Dathan, Abiram, and On, the son of Peleth, would have it, for these are the oldest men of that tribe and are also powerful because of their great wealth. When Korah spoke in this way, he wanted to seem as if he cared for the public welfare, but in truth he was trying to have that dignity transferred to himself by the multitude. This was the way he spoke to those of his own tribe, with a malicious purpose, but in persuasive language. As these words gradually spread to more people, and as those who heard them kept adding to the accusations cast on Aaron, the whole army became filled with them. There were 250 men who conspired with Korah, and they were also among the principal men. They were eager to take the priesthood away from Moses' brother, and to bring Moses himself into disgrace. The multitude too was provoked to sedition and attempted to stone Moses. They gathered together in an indecent manner, with confusion and disorder. In a tumultuous way they all raised a clamor before the tabernacle of God, accusing Moses as a tyrant and calling for the multitude to be delivered from slavery under him, because under cover of divine authority he laid violent commands upon them. They said that if God had chosen the man who was to serve as priest, he would have raised a worthy person to that dignity, and would not have produced someone inferior to many others and given him that office. They said that if God had judged it right to bestow the office on Aaron, he would have allowed the multitude to bestow it, and would not have left it to be bestowed by Aaron's own brother. Moses had long before foreseen this slander from Korah, and had seen that the people were irritated, yet he was not frightened by it. He had courage because he had given them right advice about their affairs, and because he knew that his brother had been made a participant in the priesthood by the command of God, not by any favor of his own. So he came to the assembly. He said nothing to the multitude, but spoke as loudly as he could to Korah. Moses was very skillful in speaking, and among his other natural gifts he had the ability to move the multitude greatly by his speeches. O Korah, both you and all these men with you seem worthy of this honor. I do not deny that this whole company may be worthy of the same dignity, even though they may not be as rich or as great as you are. I have not taken this office and given it to my brother because he surpassed others in riches, for you surpass us both in the greatness of your wealth. Nor did I do it because he came from an eminent family, for God, by giving us the same common ancestor, has made our families equal. Nor was it done out of brotherly affection, though another man might perhaps have done that with some justice. Certainly, if I had bestowed this honor without regard to God and his laws, I would not have passed over myself and given it to another, since I am nearer to myself than to my brother and have a closer intimacy with myself than I have with him. Surely it would not be wise for me to expose myself to the dangers of offending God, and then bestow the happy office on another for that reason. But I am above such base practices. God would not have overlooked this matter and seen himself despised in this way, nor would he have allowed you to be ignorant of what you must do in order to please him. He himself has chosen the one who is to perform that sacred office for him, and by doing so has freed us from that concern. Therefore this was not something that I pretend to give, but only what was done according to God's determination. Even so, I propose that the matter still be contested by anyone who wishes to put himself forward for it. I only ask that the man who has already been preferred, and has already obtained the office, may now also be allowed to offer himself as a candidate. Aaron values your peace, and your living without sedition, more than this honorable office, though in truth he obtained it with your approval. For although God was the giver, we do not offend when we think it right to accept it with your good will. Yet it would have been impious not to accept the honorable office when God offered it. Indeed, when God had thought fit that someone should have it for all time to come, and had made it secure and firm for him, it would have been exceedingly unreasonable to refuse it. However, God himself will judge again who it is whom he wishes to offer sacrifices to him, and to have direction over religious matters. It is absurd that Korah, who is ambitious for this honor, should deprive God of the power to give it to whomever he pleases. Therefore put an end to your sedition and disturbance over this matter. Tomorrow morning, let every one of you who desires the priesthood bring a censer from home and come here with incense and fire. And you, O Korah, leave the judgment to God and wait to see which side he will decide for on this occasion. Do not make yourself greater than God. You also come, so that this contest over this honorable office may be decided. I suppose we may allow Aaron, without offense, to present himself for this examination, since he is of the same lineage as you and has done nothing in his priesthood that can be blamed. Come together, then, and offer your incense publicly before all the people. When you offer it, the man whose sacrifice God accepts shall be ordained to the priesthood, and Aaron shall be cleared of the present slander, as though I had granted him that favor because he was my brother." When Moses had said this, the multitude stopped the disorderly behavior they had been indulging in and laid aside their suspicion of him. They praised what he had said, because his proposals were good and were regarded as such by the people. For that time, then, they dismissed the assembly. But the next day, they came together again so they could be present at the sacrifice and at the decision that was to be made between the candidates for the priesthood. This gathering proved turbulent, and the multitude was in great suspense, waiting to see what would happen. Some of them would have been pleased if Moses had been convicted of evil conduct, but the wiser people wanted to be delivered from the present disorder and disturbance. They were afraid that if this sedition continued, the good order of their settlement would be destroyed. Yet the whole body of the people naturally delights and clamors against their governors, and by changing their opinions at every speaker's harangue, they disturb the public peace. Moses now sent messengers to Abiram and Dathan and ordered them to come to the assembly and wait there for the holy services that were to be performed. But they answered the messenger that they would not obey his summons, and that they would not overlook Moses' conduct as he was becoming too powerful for them by wicked practices. When Moses heard their answer, he asked the leaders of the people to follow him, and went to the faction of Dathan, not considering it frightening at all to go to these insolent men. The leaders did not object, but went with him. When Dathan and his companions understood that Moses and the principal men of the people were coming to them, they came out with their wives and children and stood before their tents, watching to see what Moses would do. They also had their servants around them to defend them in case Moses used force against them. O Lord of the creatures in heaven, on earth, and in the sea, you are the most reliable witness of what I have done, that it has all been done by your appointment, that you gave us help whenever we attempted anything, and that you showed mercy to the Hebrews in all their distresses. Come now and hear everything I say, for no action or thought escapes your knowledge. Therefore do not refuse to speak the truth in my defense, without regard to the ungrateful accusations of these men. As for what was done before I was born, you know it best, not by report, but because you saw it, and were present when it was done. But as for what has been done lately, which these men know well enough and yet unjustly pretend to suspect, be my witness. When I was living a private and quiet life, I left the good things I enjoyed with Rachel my father, in law through my own diligence and by your counsel. I gave myself up to this people, and endured many miseries on their account. At first I bore great labors to obtain liberty for them, and now I bear them for their preservation. I have always shown myself ready to assist them in every distress. Now therefore, since I am suspected by the very men whose existence is owed to my labors, come, as it is reasonable to hope you will. You showed me that fire at Mount Sinai, I made me hear its voice, and let me see the many wonders that place provided. You commanded me to go to Egypt and declare your will to this people. You disturbed the happy condition of the Egyptians, gave us the opportunity to escape from under them, and made the dominion of Pharaoh inferior to my dominion. You made the sea dry land for us when we did not know where to go, and you overwhelmed the Egyptians with those destructive waves that had been divided for us. You gave us the security of weapons when we were unarmed. You made the corrupted fountains flow so that they were fit to drink, and supplied us with water from the rocks when we lacked it. You preserved our lives with quails, food from the sea when the fruits of the ground failed us. You sent us food from heaven such as had never been seen before. You gave us the knowledge of your laws and appointed for us a form of government. Come then, O Lord of the whole world, as a judge and witness for me who cannot be bribed, and show that I have never accepted any gift from any Hebrew against justice, that I have never condemned a man who ought to have been acquitted because of someone who was rich, and that I have never attempted to harm this commonwealth. I am now suspected of a thing utterly remote from my intentions, as if I had given the priesthood to Aaron not at your command, but out of my own favor to him. At this time, demonstrate that all things are administered by your providence, and that nothing happens by chance, but is governed by your will and so reaches its proper end. Also show that you care for those who have done good to the Hebrews. Demonstrate this by the punishment of Abiram and Dathan, who condemn you as if you were an unfeeling being, when overcome by my schemes. Do this by bringing on these men, who so madly oppose your glory, an open punishment that will take them out of the world, not in an ordinary manner, nor so that it may appear they die as other men die. Let the ground they tread on open around them and swallow them up, together with their families and their goods. This will be a demonstration of your power to all, and the manner of their suffering will teach wisdom to those who hold profane thoughts about you. By this means I shall be proved a good servant in the commands you have given through me. But if the slanders they have raised against me are true, preserve these men from every evil accident and bring upon me all the destruction I have called down on them. And when you have punished those who have tried to deal unjustly with this people, give the people concord and peace. Save this multitude that follows your commandments, preserve them free from harm, and do not let them share in the punishment of those who have sinned. For you yourself know that it is not just for the whole body of the Israelites to suffer punishment because of the wickedness of those men. When Moses had said this, with tears in his eyes, the ground suddenly moved. The shaking that set it in motion was like the movement the wind makes in the waves of the sea. All the people were frightened. The ground around the tent sank down with a great noise and a terrible sound, and drew into itself everything dear to the seditious men. They perished so completely that there was not the least sign that any person had ever been seen there. The earth that had opened around them closed again and became whole as it had been before, so that those who saw it afterward could not perceive that any such accident had happened to it. Thus these men perished, and became a demonstration of the power of God. Truly anyone would lament them, not only because of this calamity that befell them, which deserves pity, but also because their own kindred were pleased with their suffering. They forgot their relation to them, and at the sight of the sad event approved the judgment given against them. Because they regarded the people around Dathan as pestilent men, they thought they had perished as such, and did not grieve for them. Moses then called for those who were contending about the priesthood, so that a trial might be made to determine who should be priest, and so that the one whose sacrifice pleased God best might be ordained to that office. 250 men attended, men honored by the people, not only because of the power of their ancestors, but also because of their own power, in which they excelled the others. Aaron also came forward, and so did Korah. They all offered incense before the tabernacle in the censers they had brought with them. Then so great a fire shone out that no one had ever seen anything like it in any fire made by human hands, neither in eruptions from the earth caused by subterranean burning, nor in fires that arise by themselves in the woods when trees are set in motion and rub against one another. This fire was very bright, and had a terrible flame, the kind kindled at the command of God. By its sudden breaking out upon them, the whole company, including Korah himself, was destroyed so completely that their very bodies left no remains. Aaron alone was preserved, and was not hurt at all by the fire, because it was God who sent the fire to burn only those who ought to be burned. After these men were destroyed, Moses wanted the memory of this judgment to be handed down to posterity in future ages to know it. So he commanded Eleazar, the son of Aaron, to place their censers near the brazen altar, so they would be a memorial to posterity of what these men suffered for supposing that the power of God could be evaded. Thus Aaron was no longer considered to hold the priesthood by Moses' favor, but by the public judgment of God. In this way he and his children afterward enjoyed that honor and peace. However, the sedition did not end with this destruction. Instead, it grew much stronger and became more intolerable. The reason it grew worse was such that it seemed likely the calamity would not soon cease, but would last for a long time. The people already believed that nothing happened without the providence of God, so they insisted that these events had not happened without God's favor toward Moses. They therefore blamed Moses for God's anger. They said that the destruction had occurred not so much because of the wickedness of those who had been punished, but because Moses had procured their punishment. They claimed those men had been destroyed without any sin of their own, only because they were zealous for the divine worship. They also said that Moses, who had caused the people to be diminished by destroying so many men, and those the most excellent among them, had escaped punishment himself, and had now established the priesthood so firmly for his brother that no one could dispute it with him any longer. No one else, they said, could now put himself forward for it, since he must have seen those who first did so perish miserably. Besides this, the relatives of those who were destroyed earnestly begged the multitude to restrain the arrogance of Moses, because that would be safest for them. After Moses had heard for a good while that the people were in tumult, he feared they would attempt some new disturbance, and that some great and sorrowful calamity would follow. He called the multitude together and patiently listened to the defense they had to make for themselves, without opposing them, so that he would not make them more bitter. He only asked the heads of the tribes to bring their rods, with the names of their tribes written on them, and said that the priesthood should belong to the man on whose rod God gave a sign. This was agreed to. So the others brought their rods, and Aaron also brought his, on which he had written the tribe of Levi. Moses placed these rods in the tabernacle of God. On the next day he brought out the rods. Those who had brought them recognized them, since they had marked them distinctly, and the multitude recognized them also. They saw that the rest of the rods remained in the same form in which Moses had received them. But they also saw that buds and branches had grown out of Aaron's rod, with ripe fruit upon them. The fruit was almonds, for the rod had been cut from that tree. The people were so amazed at this strange sight that, although Moses and Aaron had previously been hated to some degree, they now laid the hatred aside and began to admire God's judgment concerning them. From then on they approved what God had decreed, and allowed Aaron to enjoy the priesthood in peace. Thus God ordained him priest 3 different times, and Aaron retained that honor without further disturbance. In this way the sedition of the Hebrews, which had been great and had lasted a long time, was finally settled. Now because the tribe of Levi had been freed from war and military expeditions and set apart for the divine worship, Moses was concerned that they might lack the necessities of life, seek after them, and so neglect the temple. Therefore, according to the will of God, he commanded the Hebrews that when they gained possession of the land of Canaan, they should assign 48 good and fair cities to the Levites. They were also to allow the Levites to enjoy the suburbs of those cities as far as 2,000 cubits from the city walls. Besides this, Moses appointed that the people should pay the tithe of their yearly fruits of the earth to the Levites and to the priests. This is what that tribe receives from the multitude. But I think it necessary also to set down what is paid by all the people specifically to the priests. Accordingly, Moses commanded the Levites to give up 13 of their 48 cities to the priests, and to set apart for them the 10th part of the tithes that they received from the people each year. He also commanded that it was only just to offer to God the first fruits of the entire produce of the ground. They were to offer to the priests the first-born males of those four-footed beasts appointed for sacrifice, so that they might be slain, and the priests and their whole families might eat them in the holy city. But the owners of first-born animals that were not appointed for sacrifice by the laws of their country were to bring 1.5 shekels instead. For the first-born of a man, they were to bring 5 shekels. The priests were also to receive the first fruits from the shearing of the sheep. And when anyone baked bread from grain and made loaves of it, he was to give some of what he had baked to the priests. Moreover, when any people made a sacred vow, meaning those called Nazarites, who let their hair grow long and used no wine, then when they consecrated their hair and offered it as a sacrifice, they were to assign that hair to the priests to be thrown into the fire. Likewise, those who dedicated themselves to God as a korban, which means what the Greeks call a gift, were to pay money to the priests when they desired to be released from administration, 30 shekels if the person was a woman, and 50 if the person was a man. But if anyone was too poor to pay the appointed sum, it was lawful for the priests to determine the amount as they thought fit. If anyone killed beasts at home for a private festival, but not for a religious one, he was required to bring the maw, the cheek or breast, and the right shoulder of the sacrifice to the priests. By these rules Moses arranged that the priests should be plentifully maintained, besides what they had from the sin offerings that the people gave them, as I have set down in the preceding book. He also ordered that the priests' servants, sons, daughters, and wives should share with the priests themselves in everything allotted to the priests, except what came to them from sacrifices offered for sins. Of those offerings, only the males of the priests' families might eat, and they had to eat them in the temple and on the same day they were offered. When Moses had made these constitutions after the sedition was over, he moved with the whole army and came to the borders of Idumea. He then sent ambassadors to the king of the Idumeans and asked him to grant passage through his country. Moses agreed to send whatever hostages the king desired, to assure him that no injury would be done. He also asked that the army be allowed to buy provisions, and said that if the king insisted on it, he would pay a set price even for the water they drank. But the king was not pleased with this embassy for Moses. He did not allow the army to pass, but brought his people armed to meet Moses, and to hinder them if they tried to force their way through. Moses then consulted God by the oracle, and God did not want him to begin the war first. So Moses withdrew his forces and traveled around through the wilderness. Then Miriam, the sister of Moses, came to the end of her life, having completed her 40th year since leaving Egypt. She died on the first day of the lunar month Antiquities. The people made a public funeral for her at great expense, and she was buried on a certain mountain that they call Sin. After they had mourned for her 30 days, Moses purified the people in this way. He brought a heifer that had never been used for the plow or for farm labor, complete in all its parts and entirely red in color, to a perfectly clean place a little distance from the camp. The high priest killed this heifer and sprinkled her blood with his fingers 7 times before the tabernacle of God. After this, the whole heifer was burned as she was, together with her skin and entrails, and cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool were thrown into the middle of the fire. Then a clean man gathered all her ashes together, and laid them in a perfectly clean place. Therefore, whenever any persons were defiled by a dead body, they put a little of these ashes into spring water with hyssop, dipped part of the ashes in it, and sprinkled the defiled persons with it on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. After that they were clean. Moses commanded them to do the same when the tribes came into their own land. When the purification that their leader made during the mourning for his sister was over, as it has now been described, Moses caused the army to move and march through the wilderness and through Arabia. He came to a place the Arabians consider their metropolis, formerly called Ars, but now called Petra. This place was surrounded by high mountains. There, on one of those mountains that stood before them, Aaron went up in the sight of the whole army, after Moses had already told him that he was to die. Aaron took off his pontifical garments and delivered them to Eleazar his son, to whom the high priesthood belonged because he was the elder brother. Then Aaron died while the multitude watched him. He died in the same year in which he lost his sister, having lived 123 years in all. He died on the 1st day of the lunar month called Hecatombaion by the Athenians, Luz by the Macedonians, and Abba by the Hebrews.
And there we will pause, with Aaron stripped of the high priest's robes on the mountain top, and his son Eleazar carrying them down to a people in mourning, and the old rebellious generation very nearly spent. The 40 years are almost done. The children of the slaves are now grown men and women who never knew Egypt. Ahead lie the first victories, real kingdoms, real kings, falling to this designation at last. Next time, in part 2, the conquest of Sihon and the giant Og east of the Jordan, and the strangest figure in the whole book, Balaam, the foreign prophet hired to curse Israel, who opens his mouth and cannot help but bless. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.